Here at Lake Point, we believe thanks and giving go hand in hand, which is why every year around Thanksgiving, we receive a special offering to express our gratitude to God. This year, our Thanksgiving offering will take place on Sunday, October 10th and Sunday, October 17th. We are excited to make you aware of the 3 organizations we have selected, and we invite you to prayerfully consider investing into them. One of the organizations we've selected this year is called Global Catalytic Ministries, or GCM. They work in the Middle East in countries like Iran and Afghanistan to help advance the gospel and plant churches. Believers in this part of the world live in constant danger. They can be taken from their home, beaten, raped, imprisoned, or murdered. Despite extreme persecution, Iran has the fastest growing church in the world, with Afghanistan close behind. Take a look at how you can spread the gospel in one of the most persecuted areas of the world.
There are regions of great darkness in our world. Places that stir a sense of fear and anxiety when we hear mention of them. Iran, Iraq, Kurdistan, Afghanistan, Syria. These are places that much of the world has given up on, where Satan's strongholds are firm and many have lost hope for restoration. But not you. Because of you, GCM is bringing hope to these areas of great persecution. Because of you, there are now close to 500 home churches in over 90 cities throughout the Middle East. Because of you, we are living proof that the words of Jesus stand true, that he will build his church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. You have answered a call, and we want to say thank you. Through your partnership of regular prayer and giving, you have become a part of one of the greatest rescue missions in the history of the church. And the rescue continues. If you haven't joined us yet, please consider becoming a partner today and bring hope to the hopeless.
Since that video has been made, GCM has grown to help plant over 800 home churches in the Middle East. We are partnering with GCM to launch a new project dedicated to reach, disciple, and empower Afghan women. The goal is to reach 3,240 Afghan women, raise up 40 Christian women leaders, and have 200 women in long-term discipleship relationships. If you give to GCM on October 10th or 17th, you can directly impact the lives of these Afghan women in being discipled and sharing the gospel in a highly persecuted area. Now, before I hand it back over to Pastor Michael, I want to thank you for your continued generosity. It's your financial support that makes everything we do here and around the world possible. If you would like to be a part of all we do, from our local to global endeavors to our online and on-site content, you can give by visiting lakepoint.church/give. You can also give through our LakePoint app. And if you're here on site, you can always use one of our drop boxes located at the entrances and exits of the auditorium, or visit the welcome desk in order to access the debit machine. With all that said, let's join Pastor Michael on the LakePoint stage for part 2 of our series, Bless.
Two groups of missionaries, two small communities in Thailand, two different strategies. One goal: introduce people to Jesus. And as you could probably guess, 2 different results. The strategy given to one group was to go and evangelize and convert. In essence, their mandate was to, tell whoever comes their way about Jesus, to, teach, to debate, to hold church services and gatherings. The strategy given to the second group of people was to actually go, listen, and meet the needs of the community. In essence, their mandate was to go and bless anybody that came their way, to serve, to give, to just do community projects, to serve out a relationship. And so for over 2 years, these groups of missionaries were on the ground in Thailand, and they stayed in frequent communication. A graduate student who was working on his doctoral thesis got in contact with these groups who had different strategies, and so he stayed in communication with them because he was working on a doctoral thesis entitled Blessers versus Converters. And so after 2 years, 2 things became abundantly clear. First, the presence of the blessers in the community, the people who would go and bless people and that, they saw a tremendous amount of social good happen. According to the study, they made significant contributions to the betterment of the community. Living conditions, community life, social structures had all seen improvements. However, the study showed that the group that went there as converters, there was no tangible difference in the community that they could notice. And what's more, and perhaps the most surprising part of this study and the findings, was that the blessers saw 48 people begin a relationship with Jesus, while the converters saw only 1. And so the people who blessed, like Jesus blessed people, saw almost 50 times as many conversions as the people who were purely focused on telling other people about Jesus. It's incredible, right? And perhaps it's a little bit convicting, depending on maybe some of the evangelism strategies you've used over the course of your life. And here's the reality. When you've genuinely experienced the love of God, it's something you hopefully want to share with other people. And that's a good thing. That's something that Jesus actually tells us to do. Yet often, although we have good intentions, I find we actually sabotage our own strategies. And so we think, or at least myself, I think I need to be a converter, when the reality is I just need to be a blesser. I need to live my life in such a way that is a blessing to other people. And so for myself, and maybe for many of you in this room or watching at home, the thought of evangelism probably puts a sour taste or a bad taste in your mouth, because we put so much pressure on ourselves, don't we? We think we need to we're scared to tell people about Jesus because we think we're going to need to answer all of their questions, that they're going to ask all these questions, and we need to have all these super sharp answers. Or worse, we feel like evangelism is just us trying to coerce people we care about. Which, as Nate shared last week, leaves many of us feeling like a used car salesman, or perhaps that we're part of a pyramid scheme of some sort. No offense to those of you that sell cars, and also no offense to the moms that are part of MLMs, just clarifying that. Yet, thankfully, to effectively witness for Jesus, what we see is that it requires just simple changes to our everyday life. And those simple changes are captured in what we are calling is known as the bless strategy. 2 pastors, Dave and John Ferguson, spent time studying the life of Jesus, looking for recurring patterns in how he actually, interacted with people. And so the more that these 2 guys surveyed the Gospels, they began to realize and recognize kind of these simple practices that Jesus routinely used. And so in order to help their church, they pastored in Chicago, in order to help their church in Chicago actually live it out, they came up with an acronym to capture what Jesus did on a regular basis. And the acronym they came up with was the word bless. And so bless is begin with prayer, listen, eat, serve, and story. And those are 5 kind of practical ways that we can actually be a blessing to people around us. And so it's 5 things that we here at Lake Point want to put into practice, want to make a routine, want to make it a part of our everyday life. Now, what is cool is we actually see God's stamp of approval on this strategy, on the blessing strategy, right from the beginning, right from the outset of Scriptures. And speaking to Abram, God's very first missionary, which is recorded in the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, this is what he says to Abram. He says this: "Leave your native country, your relatives, and your father's family, and go to the land that I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you. The earth will be blessed through you. The word blessed, God repeats it 5 times in just 2 verses. And why? It's because it's his plan from the beginning. It was his plan through Jesus. Jesus demonstrated, and it's his plan for us that he would bless us so that we could actually be a blessing to other people. God wants to bless the world through you. It's been his heart since the beginning. And so the question, right, is how do we do that? Like, do we actually live our lives in such a way where we can bless other people? Well, as Nate shared last week, you begin with prayer. You pray and you ask God who he has placed in your life that he wants to use you to bless. You pray and ask God for these opportunities to build or strengthen a relationship with the people that God has placed on your heart. And you pray and you ask God for wisdom or courage or discernment or whatever you're going to need in order to best love those people. And once praying for other people becomes a regular occurrence in your life, the second practice that you need to kind of start putting into your life that Jesus demonstrated so well is you need to start listening. Something that sounds really simple, doesn't it? But it's also something that so few of us actually do. When I told my wife this week that I was preaching on listening, first she laughed. Then she said, Michael, I think it's best if you talk about something you know how to do. Which is rude, right? But here's the thing. I get the last laugh. Because I was just able to repeat to you verbatim what she said to me. Which means that I, in fact, know how to listen. Take that, Melissa. Game, set, match, right? But here's the reality. Like, we live in a world where listening, truly listening, it seems like a lost art. Like, let me ask you, when is the last time you genuinely felt listened to? Now, I don't have time to listen to you right now. We're not going to go around. But just kind of think about it in your head. You know, when is the last time you genuinely felt somebody heard what you had to say? And you don't have to look much further than like social media to see that most people are more interested in what they have to say than in what other people have to say. And for the last number of years, actually, sociologists, they've kind of been sounding the alarm that our culture, we've actually been becoming increasingly narcissistic. That more and more people, are demonstrating excessive interest and admiration in themselves. And so studies are showing that we're becoming more selfish, more entitled, we're less empathetic, and a lot needier in our pursuit of acknowledgement from other people. And it's not just one generation, it's everybody. As a collective, our society is becoming more narcissistic. And so why I share that is because I believe those things actually create one of the biggest barriers, one of the greatest barriers when it comes to being a blessing and when it comes to listening. And so that barrier is this. The greatest barrier to being a good listener is that we are too preoccupied with ourselves. It's just the reality. We're not actually listening. We're just waiting for our turn to speak. We're just kind of mentally cueing what we want to say next. We're so concerned with what we're going to say and how we're going to say it that we don't ever actually check in fully to a conversation. Or if we do, we kind of quickly check out because we're worried about what's coming next or some other thing that we're thinking about. And so we're so preoccupied with our needs, our wants, our thoughts, and our feelings during a conversation that it's virtually impossible for us to, consider or appreciate the needs, wants, thoughts, and feelings of the other person, which is a problem, right? And unfortunately, as much as we may want to, we can't force other people to listen to us the way we want them to listen to us, right? That's out of our control. However, we can learn to listen to other people the way we would want them to listen to us. And listening to somebody in that manner, it is an incredibly powerful way to bless them. It's incredibly powerful. I love how David Augsburger says it. He says it this way. He says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they are almost indistinguishable. Being heard and being loved are so similar, most people can't actually tell them apart. And when the people in our lives, when the people in your life, when they feel unheard, it leaves them feeling unknown. And when they feel unknown, it ultimately is going to leave them feeling unloved. And so if we as a church, as followers of Jesus, actually want to love our neighbors, if we want to love our coworkers, our families, and our friends, if we want to be a blessing, then we need to become intentional about listening. Now, thankfully, we have a pretty good example of someone who listens very well. His name is Jesus. You might have heard of him. He was an amazing listener. And time again, Jesus took the time to show love in the most practical of ways by simply being present and listening. And so if you've got your Bible with you or a Bible app, you can flip it open to Luke chapter 18. And we read about this exchange, and so I want to kind of set the stage for you a little bit of what's going on here. First, you've got Jesus. You know, he's hugely popular. He's extremely busy. And if you know his story, he's kind of polarizing at the time. And so there are crowds of people, though, clamoring for his time and his attention. And unbeknownst to the people around him at this time, you know, it's kind of getting close to the point in time where Jesus would actually be arrested and sent to the cross. And so this is just a few days before Passover, before these events are going to take place. Second, we've got this other character in the story who's this blind beggar. And we're told elsewhere, this story is captured multiple places in the scriptures, and elsewhere we're told that this guy's name is actually Bartimaeus. And he's insignificant, and he's easily overlooked, and he's kind of cast this unfortunate lot in life. I mean, he's blind. Seemingly, the only positive thing that Bartimaeus has going for him is his name. Like if you're expecting a boy soon, like you might want to add Bartimaeus to the boy name list because it's pretty awesome. Anyways, I digress. Luke 18 says this. When Jesus was coming close to Jericho, a blind man, Bart, sat begging beside the road. The man heard the crowd walking by and asked what was happening. Some people told him that Jesus from Nazareth was passing by. And so the blind man shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." The people who were going along with Jesus told the man to be quiet, but he shouted even louder, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and told some people to bring the man over to him. And so let's pause the story here for a moment because I don't want you to miss the significance of what's going on. Is, you know, Jericho is one of the last stops on the way to Jerusalem. People, as I said, they're getting ready for Passover. There are hordes of people in this city as they make their way to Jerusalem. Yet in the midst of all this chaos, there's this blind man who is crying out, "Have pity on me. Have mercy on me." And somehow, in all that commotion, Jesus hears that singular voice. It reminds me of how my wife can hear the faintest noise that our sons make in the night. Like, meanwhile, I am dead to the world, but she can hear them. And my oldest son, Levi, he's actually autistic, and so he's prone to have the occasional bad night where he's like awake from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. Yeah, it's as fun as it sounds. Now, on some of those nights, though, I've been known to perhaps sleep through it, okay? Rarely, okay? But my wife, sometimes Melissa, she is gracious enough to actually let me sleep and not wake up. Like if she knows I have to preach, she's not going to wake me up in the middle of the night. However, what I've learned, though, I've discovered something, is when I've enjoyed a full night rest, it's not wise to wake up and say, "Hey, Levi had a good night, didn't he?" Because if he didn't, you better believe I'm getting a smack, okay? Now, but I like to think that Jesus hears the cries of blind Bart, the same way that my wife is attuned to the hearing our children. And the people that are traveling with Jesus, they tell Bart to kind of like leave him alone. But he wouldn't. He couldn't. Instead, he cries out even louder. And so this is what happens next that we read in the story. Jesus asked the man, he asked Bart, he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see," he answered. Jesus replied, "Look and you will see. Your eyes are healed because of your faith." Now, when we read that story, it's very easy for us. I get focused on the miracle at least, right? Like blind Bart can't see. Bart calls out to Jesus. Jesus heals him. The end. But don't skip over the question that Jesus asked. Because before healing him, Jesus asked, what do you want me to do for you? Which seems like a really dumb question, doesn't it, if we're being honest? Like you know the disciples are standing there thinking like, Jesus, like, come on, man. Like, you know he's not making eye contact with you, right? Like he's got sunglasses on, and he's got a dog you're not allowed to pet. Like take a wild guess at what this guy wants. But you know and I know that Jesus doesn't actually ask dumb questions. There's more kind of going on here to this interaction. And so Jesus knew that Bart was blind. And I don't think that Jesus was asking the question just to kind of build dramatic tension before performing the miracle. I believe that Jesus simply lived his life in such a way that he didn't want to assume he knew what other people needed. And I think he actually wants us to do the same. Jesus wants us to resist this trap of assumption of where we kind of guess the conclusion or guess what people need. And so he modeled for us what it looks like to actually ask questions and to genuinely listen to answers. And so when you flip through the accounts of Jesus' life, when you look at his ministry and written in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, it's natural to notice the miracles. Healing the sick, feeding the hungry, raising the dead. Those are exceptional and those are extraordinary moments, right? But as you kind of become more familiar with the blessed practices as we go through the series, I bet if you kind of go back and you reread the stories of Jesus, you're going to notice just how frequently Jesus kind of practiced these seemingly ordinary, everyday things. Things like genuinely listening to another human being. I love the way that Dave Ferguson says it. He says, living a life of blessing others like Jesus did is not a journey of the spectacular. In fact, it's usually best lived out in the regular, in the everyday, in these seemingly mundane moments of life. We can get within arm's reach of another person and actually listen to what's going on in their hearts and in their thoughts. The amazing thing about Jesus is he is totally engaged with everyone that he meets. He's just completely mindful of them, of their lives, of their interests, of their joys, of their sufferings. When he is with fishermen, he talks about fishing. When he is with farmers, he talks about seeds and soil and weeds. And Jesus is just always present with the people he meets as if there is nobody else in the world. And that kind of attention, that kind of presence, that kind of listening changes the world. Because when we offer that to another human being, we actually can change their world. A woman named Michelle Frost, she was part of a missionary team who traveled to a remote kind of village. She wanted to serve a remote village in India. And so this team of people, they showed up with supplies and skilled workers and programs to run. And they were really, really ready to kind of transform this village into a place of health and vitality. And so the first thing they did when they arrived, they went to one of the slums and they were talking to people there. And they said, we've got some options on how we can bless you guys, some things that our team is ready and prepared to do. We could build a medical clinic to kind of help you take care of the sick and the hurting, or we could, build a school where we could provide education and kind of help break the cycle of poverty, or we could, build a church that you could kind of gather in together and learn about God. And so the team kind of laid out their plans and what they were able to do, and they said, so which of those projects, what do you want us to do for you? Which sounds an awful lot like the question that Jesus asked Bart, and that's a good thing. However, unlike Bart, the people of the village, they responded with an answer that the missionary team was not expecting. And the Indian villagers, what they actually said is, well, the thing we need most is a mailbox. They said, we need a mailbox. And to which the missionary team was like, wait, you must not have heard us. We said, we have the stuff to build like a school or like a clinic or, any of those things. And they said, we heard you. We heard you. We actually want a mailbox. You see, what the missionaries didn't know was that in India, not having a mailbox meant you didn't have a postal code. And if you didn't have a postal code, that means you don't actually exist on the map. Even if you live in a community of 20,000 people, no postal code means that you have no recognition. And no recognition means that you are ineligible for social services provided by the government. And so all those villagers wanted was an identity. They wanted to be recognized as part of their own country. And had the missionaries not asked that question, had they not actually listened to what the people had to say, they would never have known that a mailbox was these people's greatest need. And it sounds simple, but actually getting a mailbox was no easy task. It took the missionaries over 2 years of kind of wading through the bureaucracy to get the village this registered with a postal code, to get them a mailbox. And when they finally got that mailbox, that's when that village finally started to transform. And so, friends, if we want to bless other people, then we need to work against and avoid the trap of assumption. And we actually need to learn to listen to what is being communicated, to ask those questions, just like Michelle Frost and her team, and much like Jesus in his interaction with Bart. Now, I know listening is such a simple concept. I get that. But the reason we're talking about it, as I've mentioned, is that although it seems so simple and so common, so few of us actually do it well. And so with the time I have left, I just want to kind of quickly give you some really practical ways to actually become a better listener, to learn how to listen. And the first thing that you need to do when you have the opportunity to chat and sit down with maybe a friend, a neighbor, a coworker, a family member, the first thing you need to do when you have a chance to listen to somebody is you need to engage your brain. All right? You need to actually engage your brain. And what I mean by that is you have to actually commit to using processing power when you're listening to somebody. You can't just go like tune out and go on to autopilot. You can't just be like passively nodding along or saying, oh yeah, or every so often, right? Like not speaking, like just being quiet, like not speaking is not the same as listening. In order to listen, you need to actually think about what is actually being spoken to you. And so you need to engage your brain with what is being said. Now, for those of you kind of on site, I want to have a little bit of fun with you. I got a little bit of a test to test your active listening skills. I want to test how engaged your brain is this morning with what I'm saying. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you, quiz you on what I've already said because mostly my ego couldn't handle that. What I've got for you is a little riddle that you just have to listen to, all right? Engage, think about it, engage with it. All right, you guys ready? Let's say you're driving a bus. At the first stop, 5 people get on the bus. At the next stop, 3 people get off the bus and 2 people get on. At the next stop, 10 people get on the bus and 6 people get off. What is the age of the bus driver? No, you are not 22, sir. See, Dave wasn't listening. Neither was apparently anybody else. The answer is however old you are. Because the first thing I said was you were driving the bus. Now, I know it's not perfect. But hopefully you get the idea. If you want to be a better listener, you actually have to engage your brain with what the speaker is saying at all times. And so don't listen passively, listen actively. The second thing that you need to do if you want to become a better listener is you actually need to erase the noise. It's no surprise that there's a lot of distractions that we need to fight against when we're listening to someone. In his book, Dave Ferguson actually describes 4 types of noise that we need to learn to kind of tune out when we're in a conversation with other people. And so the first type of noise that we need to learn to tune out is physical noise, which is kind of any noise that happens in the setting that you're having the conversation in. It could be the hum of a fan, it could be cars driving by, or if you're in my living room, it could be screaming children. Any of those things, you have to learn to kind of erase that noise. The second one is we've got psychological noise, which is the noise that happens between our ears. It's those thoughts that race through our minds that are kind of completely unrelated to the conversation at hand. And so we have to learn to kind of push those aside and focus on what we're actually talking about, what we're listening to. The third type of noise is physiological noise, which is the noise that happens with these feelings, something that we're feeling inside of our body. And so maybe you skipped lunch, and so your stomach is kind of growling, or perhaps you didn't skip lunch, and so the food you ate is actually making your colon growl. Like, whatever it is, that's kind of the physiological noise that you gotta have to learn to kind of ignore at times. And then the fourth type of noise that can kind of interfere with our listening is actually semantic noise. And semantic noise is caused when we kind of get confused by the meaning of the speaker's words. And this is a type of noise that I can appreciate maybe the most as a communicator, because I am fully aware that everything I say from this stage is heard and filtered differently by everybody in this room. And so if you want to be a really good listener, it requires you learning to block out these distractions, to block out physical noise, psychological noise, physiological noise, and to block out semantic noise. And in the instances where there is these kind of semantic misunderstandings, where you're not really quite sure, a word means something to you, but it might mean something to someone else, then those are the times where you need to actually get good at asking kind of clarifying questions and not just jumping to conclusions, not just kind of filling in the blanks with your own story. You probably know this, every word we use in the English language, every word ever created, it has both denotation and connotation. And so denotation is what that word actually means. What that word means is according to the dictionary. Connotation is the emotions that word provokes for people. And different words have different connotations for different people. And so it's okay, because of that, it's okay to ask the speaker to clarify what they meant by what they said. It's okay to ask clarifying questions. It's important if you actually want to understand the heart of what someone is trying to say to you or communicate with you. And so that kind of leads us into the third tip for becoming a better listener. And so our third tip is this: exercise good questions. Often a good question is a clarifying question, kind of like I just mentioned, when there's a word you don't understand or you're not quite sure what someone meant. A clarifying question is a great thing when you're trying to listen to someone. Other times, a good question is a discovery question, the discovery questions, what they do is they help you learn or appreciate something new about the person you're talking with. And so these questions, they're powerful things at your disposal. And what you need to know is that Jesus himself asked way more questions than he ever answered. Like, I'm talking a disproportionate amount. According to some people who've counted and gone through it, we're talking 307 questions asked and 3 answered. Now, I don't know about you, but when I'm in a conversation with people, sometimes I'm just I want to be engaged, I want to listen, I want to be, I want this to be beneficial for the other person as well, but I just kind of struggle to come up with questions on the spot. It's not that I don't care, my mind just kind of goes blank and I'm not really sure what to say or what to do. And so I just kind of came across this and I want to pass these along to you. They're kind of 4 categories of questions that you can draw from when you're talking to someone. So when you're talking to that coworker, or you're talking to even that family member, whoever it might be, these are kind of 4 categories that are always kind of safe to ask that you can go to. And conveniently, they all start with the letter H, so they're easier to remember. And so this is what they are. You've got questions about history. You can always ask questions that relate to history. Questions are tell me your story. What was life like, for you growing up? Tell me more of the details behind that event. Second, you can always ask questions about heart. What's your favorite hockey team? Your favorite restaurant, your favorite vacation destinations. The third kind of category of questions that you can always ask someone is habit. What do you do with your free time? What do you like to do for fun? What are some skills that you've picked up over the course of your life? And then the fourth kind of set of questions that you can always ask are questions that deal with hurt. How are you doing right now with whatever situation that person is walking through? And so history, heart, habits, and hurt. They're the categories of questions that when you're really listening to someone, if you want to kind of use questions of discovery, if you want to ask good questions, those are the categories of questions that you should be asking in. History, heart, habit, and hurt. Use them. Use them well. Clarifying discovery-based questions, asking questions about people, asking getting to know them more intimately, to get to know their lives. It's a powerful communicator of love. And so if you want to be a good listener, if we as a church want to be known as good listeners, then we need to engage our brains in conversation. We need to make sure that we're mentally checked in. We need to erase the noise, fight against all the different types of noise that kind of can distract us from the conversation at hand. And we need to learn to exercise good questions, to actually ask good questions, to ask clarifying questions when we're not sure what's going on. Because listening is an act of love, and you bless people when you genuinely listen to them. And so often, I find that Christians think that we need to say something. When someone comes to us, we feel like we need to offer advice or we need to offer an opinion or some sort. I feel that as a pastor a lot of time. But in reality, listening can be even a greater service than speaking. And can I also just say that, you don't, for those of you maybe in this room, that you don't need to be afraid of listening to other people's worldviews. I find so many Christians kind of refuse to read or acknowledge or listen to any thoughts that kind of threaten their faith. So what we do is we kind of shut down or shut out voices of other religions or political beliefs or social beliefs or maybe scientific studies. But here's the thing. If Jesus is king, you don't need to worry about him being dethroned just because you listened to or understood somebody else's perspective. If he's king, you don't need to worry about him being dethroned by a conversation, of you actually listening to something. And so if you truly desire to point somebody towards Jesus, step 1 is having a really good understanding of where they're coming from. That's step 1. We see that Paul in Acts chapter 17, he actually goes and he's in Athens and he has this conversation. He gets to speak in the Areopagus with the most famous, with the most influential people. And what he says is, he says, I've seen and I have studied. I know where you guys are coming from. You have this statue to the unknown God. And so let me tell you about the known God. He knew where they were coming from. He knew what they believed. He wasn't afraid of what they believed because he knew Jesus. The brilliant Henry Nouwen, he kind of summarizes it all this way. He says, to listen is very hard, because it asks of us so much interior stability that we no longer need to prove ourselves by speeches or arguments or statements or declarations. True listeners no longer have an inner need to make their presence known. They are free to receive, to welcome, and to accept. Listening is much more than allowing another to talk while waiting for a chance to respond. Listening is paying full attention to others and welcoming them into our very beings. The beauty of listening is that those who are listened to start feeling accepted, start taking their words more seriously, and discovering their own true selves. Listening is a form of spiritual hospitality by which you can invite strangers to become friends. It's a form of spiritual hospitality. And so Lake Point, I just say that listening, being good listeners, needs to become a lifeblood of this church. Like, we need to engage in spiritual hospitality, the spiritual hospitality of listening. And if we want other people, if it's our desire to see other people come to know the love and leadership of Christ, like we've come to know the love and leadership of Christ in our lives, then we need to learn how to be present and how to practice good listening. We need to be tuned in to people. And so as we wrap this up, allow me to share the story of an Australian man who actually passed away a few years ago, and his name was Don Ritchie. And so for over 50 years, he lived across the street from a rock cliff at the entrance to Sydney Harbor, and he lived in this area called the Gap. And while the rock cliff is famous for its view, there's actually another reason it's famous as well. Since the 1800s, people have come to this place to jump off the cliff and end their lives. There's only this small fence that separates people from the edge of the cliff. And so on average, they estimate that a person commits suicide once a week at the Gap. However, over the course of 50 years, Don has tried his best to make a difference. And according to official records, over the course of his life, Don saved 160 people. Members of his family suggest that number is actually closer to 500. And so how did he do it? Every day, he would look out his window to see if someone was standing alone and close to the edge. And if he noticed them there, he would run out of his house and he would run across the street and he would rush to interact with them. And a news article from 2010, I think, describes this moment best. It reads, "In those bleak moments, when the lost soul stood atop the cliff, wondering whether to jump, the sound of the wind and the waves was broken by a soft voice. 'Why don't you come and have a cup of tea?' All Don did was offer a cup of tea, but more importantly, he offered someone who would listen to them. In interviews, Don actually affirmed that he never tried to counsel or advise or pry. He just offered them an ear to hear their story. And so, no, the stakes aren't always going to be that high when we listen to people, right? It's not always a matter of life and death. But I shared Don's story with you. The reason I shared it is because I want you to know the power of genuinely listening to another human being. And Jesus heard one man's voice in a large crowd. And so he asked that man that question. He said, "What do you want me to do, Bart? What can I do for you?" And every day, I believe there are people that you come into contact with. There are people that you do life with that you can bless with an act as simple as listening to them. Friends, we cannot bless the world without listening to people. We can't be a blessing without listening to people. And so that's what I invite you to do this week. I invite you to be a blessing to those people you've been praying for. As opportunities arise for you to interact and listen to the people you've been praying for, as opportunities arise for you to genuinely listen to those people you do life with, maybe it's a coworker over lunch or a neighbor across the street as you're both doing yard work, what I say is seize those moments. And in those moments, engage your brain. Engage your brain, be focused, use it, use the horsepower that's in there. Erase the noise, shut out the distractions, push aside those stray thoughts, push aside anytime they prop up, and then ask good questions. Clarify what the person is saying to you. Discover more, ask good questions, go deeper and hear what they truly want to say and share. Listening, guys, is the gateway to blessing. It's a gateway to blessing. And so if you ever want the chance to share your story, if you ever want the chance to share what Jesus has done in your life, you better believe it starts with listening and getting to know their story first. It begins with being a good listener. Let's pray. God, I thank you that you are a God time and time again that hears our cries, that listens to us, that acknowledges us, a God that we can know and feel known by. And so, Jesus, as we seek to bless our community, as we seek to live this out, as we seek to not only be blessed, but to bless others through that blessing, God, I pray that we would learn as a church to be better listeners. That we would engage our brains in the conversations, that we wouldn't be passive, that we would be active, God. That we would erase the noise, that we push those distractions aside so that we can be focused on what's going on, God. And that we would learn to exercise good questions. That we'd ask questions that help us to truly know someone and go deeper and to avoid misunderstanding and confusion, God. Because listening is love. Listening and love are so close together. Most people can't tell them apart, God. And it's our desire to love people, to bless them. And so help us to do it in this simple way, God. We pray this in your name. Amen.